Welcome to the Joy of Cooking podcast. Each week we gather around the table to share recipes and stories from the authors of The Joy of Cooking, kitchen victories and mishaps, and what we're cooking and eating right now. We're glad you've joined us at the table today. I'm Shannon Larson, home cook, Joy of Cooking user and fan, and Garlicscape enthusiast.
I'm Megan Scott, co-author of the 2019 edition of The Joy of Cooking. I'm a food editor by day and avoider of dish duty by night, and kimchi stew will heal you if you just let it.
I'm John Becker, fourth-generation co-author and steward of The Joy of Cooking, America's oldest family-run cookbook. And when confronted with hot dogs, I turn to my griddle rather than my grill. Firm believer in splitting hot dogs and just browning the crap out of them on a griddle.
I just like the idea of confrontational hot dogs.
Well, you obviously live a different life than me.
Thank you, John. And today we are joined by Arnab Chakladar. Arnab is a professor of post-colonial literature and culture in the English department at Carleton College. He was the founder of a now-defunct site on South Asian culture, Another Subcontinent, and has been active in the online food world since the early 2000s. He writes a food and whiskey blog called My Annoying Opinions and is the author of the forthcoming cookbook, Contemporary Indian Cooking. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
What has everyone been cooking and eating and enjoying this week? Shannon, let's start with you.
Garlicscapes.
What did you do?
Grilled them on the Blackstone flat top. They're just really good. And it's just like you get them for a very small period of time. And anything where you just have like a couple of weeks with something, I just think it's special. And they came from our garden, which makes it even
Oh, that's so
more
nice.
special. And then we had a friend over for dinner last night, and I made a tomato, peach, strawberry, basil burrata salad.
Whoa.
That was really, really good. It was just like summer in a bowl, and we ate almost all of it. It was a lot, though. I overdid it. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, because I have a question for you. I told my friend I would ask this very quickly. I was at a wedding this weekend, and I'm sitting with my friend, and he is convinced that wedding cake is a specific kind of cake. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, of course, the entire wedding, he's like looking at his, not the actual like ceremony, but after that, he's
he's not really committed to his opinion then if he's not.
But he was looking at it like through the reception, like trying to look up online. He's like swears wedding cake is a specific kind of like dense white cake.
I'm sure that there is a recipe out there that is entitled wedding cake this person could point to. But
in general,
no.
It's just the wedding cake you want.
Yeah, I do think that like old school classic wedding cake is that white layer cake, because the one in Joy, the wedding cake instructions uses the white cake recipe because it can be scaled up many times and still taste good.
Okay.
But I would say people have been doing all kinds of cakes for their weddings, and
I mean, you made pound cakes for our wedding.
yeah,
you made our wedding cake too.
I did.
But okay, I just needed to make that like clear on air. I told him, I'm like, no, this is going out there into the universe. So thank you.
Make him listen to the episode.
I will.
What about you, John?
Well, I did have a hot dog confrontation that, I managed to get through it. But aside from that.
Wait, you're advocating for cooking the hot dogs on a griddle, not a grill.
That's correct.
Okay.
Unless your grandpa Brian is cooking the hot dogs, in which case the grill is the preferred method because he has a special, I'm not even sure what his method is. I think his method is to just forget about the hot dogs and, with a fairly low heat on his gas grill until they have concentrated and, kind of raisined up a little bit.
Yeah, it
sounds bad, but it's actually...
I actually think it's the
really
perfect way to cook hot dogs until they're a little bit blackened and kind of shrivelly because, I don't know, it adds like a texture, like they almost have a
crunch?
more of a snap when you bite it. And then they have more flavor because they're a little bit charred. But I don't think it's because he forgot about them. He's worried them too much. You know what I mean? He like worries over it.
I guess I figure it's just like inattention because, the only time I ever had a hot dog quite like that before I met your grandpa was at this gas station where they would just leave it on
the rollers.
It wasn't even a rollers. It was like this weird Ferris wheel of porky goodness. Like, it was kind of looked like a toaster oven, but, with this little spiky thing that they would just impale the hot dogs on. And yeah, they would just let him go for a long time. And at about, if I remember correctly, it was around 3:00, they hit peak snappy.
Oh my
Wow.
God. Schedule down.
I mean, there wasn't a lot going on in my life at that point. So
Here's a hot dog confrontation for you, though. I'm a firm believer in ketchup on hot dogs.
Ooh,
Actually, I don't have any problem with that. Do you?
I really don't have a dog in this race. No,
Dog in this race.
hot dogma. No hot dogma to apply here.
Are you a just ketchup person, or do you have other toppings?
No, I'm a maximalist. So everything, ketchup, mustard, relish, onions, whatever there is, I'm going to put it on. Put it on it. Pickled jalapenos. Like, I want it all.
Do you know?
I think it's one of the great American foodie shibboleths, though, the no ketchup on a hot dog.
Yeah, I feel like every little region has its own hot dog toppings that they do, because North Carolina has its own set of toppings. Like, you do like a no beans chili slaw, finely chopped slaw, not shredded, and then
Mustard.
usually onions and mustard. And then there's like Chicago dogs and
Yeah.
I don't know what all. New Mexico dogs.
I'm on the maximalist side of things. All bets are off at a gas station. That's just like a lawless
Yeah, you can do whatever you
situation.
want there.
Yeah.
There's no one to see you. What have you been cooking this week, Arnab?
We've actually been eating a lot of last summer's tomato sauce. You know, I always, from our garden, I just make a lot of sauce, and I calculate precisely how many times a week for the next 40 weeks we can eat the sauce before we run out, before the tomatoes get ripe again. And I always, make way more sauce than we actually eat. So we now need to finish all the sauce in the freezer before the new tomatoes come online in a month or so.
That's great. I actually plan on asking you about what your top recommended strategies are for dealing with like bumper crops at the end of the summer, because I feel like I'm always seeing on your Instagram account, like you have this just ridiculous amount of produce to put up.
Well, mostly it's, giving it away to various undeserving people. That's how it goes.
But you freeze your sauce, you don't can it.
Yeah, I don't can it. And this is partly because, I used to once upon a time make a lot of jam as well. And so all my canning energy would go to the jam at our old house. I just didn't have enough time and space to do both. So I put the sauce in Ziploc bags, lay them flat, freeze them, and then just stack them up. It takes a very little space.
That's kind of nice too, because I think usually if you're canning the sauce, you have to go by a prescribed recipe because you have to make sure it's acidic enough. But then freezing, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like the lemon juice in tomato sauce. So.
Yeah.
I've started just freezing my whole tomatoes at the end of the year and putting those in my deep freezer and then using them throughout for different things too. And that seems to work well. The skins go off like super easily.
It's great. You seem to get a lot at once, but I don't know. I feel like we always get like maybe half a dozen good tomatoes at once. And so, it's good to like just kind of store them up in the freezer until we could actually make.
Yeah, we don't have the bumper crop problem, which is sad. And no one needs to take tomato growing advice from me. Like cooking, sure, but I just can't seem to get tomatoes to grow well, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong, and it makes me a little upset. I started using fish emulsion, and even that isn't really doing it, so I don't know what.
I recommend, and this is for all forms of rearing, benign neglect. So, I put them in the ground, and every once in a while I remember to water them and prune them. This year I haven't even pruned them, and they do better than in the years when I fuss over them.
Okay.
But mostly I'd guess that you guys, unlike me, grow a reasonable amount of tomatoes. I mean, we're a family of 4, and I usually have like 32 plants, so.
Oh my God. Wow.
Oh,
So I'm averaging it out on volume,
wow.
not maximizing the yield from every plant.
Oh my gosh, 32 tomato plants.
How many different varieties?
So this year I have fewer because we were out of town in the high point of the planting season. So this year there's only 26 of the 26, 6 Amish pastes and 6 San Marzanos, I want to say. So those are my 12 sauce tomatoes. And then 2 cherry tomatoes, chocolate cherry, which is my partner's favorite, and Brad's Atomic Grape, which is, crazy name, looks like a crazy tomato, but really, really tasty. And then a whole bunch of larger slicers. So, Brandywines and Big Rainbows and Black Crims. And I like to grow, a couple of new ones each year. They don't always work out, but, keeps things interesting.
Have you ever grown pineapple? I mean, the tomato called pineapple.
Oh, yeah. It's one of my favorites. But for whatever reason, our nursery in town hasn't had it in years. Last year, I grew something called a pineapple pig. Which was attractive and a prolific producer, but not very tasty, I don't think. And this year I'm growing, last year as well I grew it. I liked it a lot last year. Ananas Noir, which is I think is a hybrid of pineapple and some black variety. It's a greenish, blackish, yellowish tomato.
Nice. Okay, well, benign neglect is my strategy for next year. It's too late this year, but I'll do it next year. Irma Rombauer believed that cooking should be joyful, and that philosophy changed the way America eats. Her great-nephew, Kerner, carried that same joy and generosity to Napa Valley, founding Rombauer Vineyards in 1980. The winery was built on the same belief that made the cookbook a classic, that good food and wine should bring people together. And just as the joy of cooking has been in American kitchens for nearly a century, today Rombauer is one of California's most celebrated wineries and the perfect pairing for every meal you cook from the book. Your next favorite pairing is waiting at rombauer.com/joy. Use code JOYPOD, that's JOYPOD, all caps, for 15% off your order. That's ROMBAUER.com/joy and use code JOYPOD at checkout.
Must be 21 to enjoy.
So we ask all of our guests, what's your relationship to the joy of cooking?
Well, for one thing, as I've said before, I think to you guys, during the pandemic years, various editions of Joy of Cooking were my laptop stand, right? Right now, my laptop is sitting on the latest edition of the Joy of Cooking.
Very useful for that.
In a very literal sense, the Joy of Cooking supports my my daily life. But for me, not being American, not having grown up in American kitchens, I feel a great deal of affection for the book, largely because of its origins as a home cooking book and its sort of continuity. To me, it's a great resource to check on things, right? So there are very few cookbooks I ever cook from, in any direct kind of way. But the Joy of Cooking for me is a place where I go to check for making bread, to sort of check on, well, what could I be doing instead? Is there some other way of doing this? It's a very handy resource. I was looking at the sauces earlier, right? When you have a barbecue coming up, as we do this weekend, look at, get some ideas, real quick ideas for things you could throw together on the fly. I did want to give a shout out as well to some other Indian cookbooks.
Go for it.
I want to give a big shout out, for example, to a great cookbook that came out last year. The authors, I think, were guests on your podcast before me, Jyoti and Ayan Mukherjee's Heartland Masala, which I think is just a fabulous Indian American cookbook, which brings together recipes from many different parts of India, and has this great voice and so on. And despite I don't want to give the wrong impression either about my relationship with Mother Jaffrey. I think Mother Jaffrey's cookbooks are all, each and every one of them is just fabulous, and you will never make something that comes out bad if you follow one of her recipes. But beyond that, I mostly cook from or look at Indian cookbooks that are published in India, various regional cookbooks, and so on.
Before we move further in the podcast, I wanted to talk about our Joy Scouts recipe of the week from the past week, which was Megan's Avocado Club sandwich on page 137, which we didn't make. And my excuse is that we're not in...
Again.
My excuse is that we're not in full-on tomato season yet, at least not at our house. So I feel like you need the good slicing tomato to make a good club sandwich.
I'm just now seeing the little cherry tomatoes in the market that look pretty good, and still we're not at slicer time yet.
So
that's a good excuse.
But in Minnesota, we're still waiting for the ground to thaw, so tomatoes are still a while away.
We're having January over here too. It's been kind of cold, which I'm not going to complain. But if you make Megan's Avocado Club sandwich on page 137, please tag us on Instagram at The Joy of Cooking. We would love to see what you make. All right, so the tables have turned, Arnab, because usually we are the ones being interrogated by your classes. Can you talk a little bit about your food writing class and how that came to be?
Yeah, sure. So as you introduced me in the way I think my department would like me to be introduced as a professor of post-colonial literature. I think they are a little, well, I shouldn't speak for all of them, but I think at least some of them are a little bit nonplussed by my food writing avatar. But after having done food writing of a very informal kind for a long time on forums and then on my blog and so on, I decided to start teaching it. And so the class that I've been teaching now for some 5 years essentially it's American food writing. So it's a hybrid kind of class. What we do is we read various kinds of American food writing, all the way from A.J. Liebling and M.F.K. Fisher on down to the present, in a number of different genres: feature writing, cookbook writing, food history, etc., restaurant reviews. And so that's the coursework that we do, and then the work that the students do is producing food writing of their own in various genres. So it's partly a cultural history, cultural studies of American food and American food writing, and partly it's a a creative writing class. Though I don't think very many of my students have any ambitions of going into food writing professionally. It's just it's just an interesting thing for them to do on the way out the door at the college.
What prompted you to start the class? Was there a demand for it?
No, I mean, in that nobody had asked for it, and there's also a way in which food writing is sort of a very old-fashioned thing. If I really wanted to court an audience, really should have been like food talk or something, right? Instagram and TikTok, YouTube videos. So no, I didn't. There was no real outcry for it, but it's gratifyingly, it's been an incredibly popular class throughout. And the first few times I taught it, the wait list to get into the class was as long as the enrollment. That's tapered off a little bit. But it's still a very popular class that fills much faster, I'm sorry to say, than my classes on Indian literature or Bollywood cinema and so on.
I think this was my first interaction with you. I'm trying to remember, but it was on Twitter and the old days. I think there was somebody was talking about a dessert hummus. And I think I said something disparaging about the dessert hummus. You probably don't remember this. I don't know why I remember this.
I have no memory of this. But,
I remember
but
the weird
if it's witty and smart, I will own it.
I don't remember your exact response. It was something about dessert hummus. I had something disparaging to say about it, and you countered with, "Well, there are actually a lot of chickpea-based desserts in Indian cuisine."
Right.
And I was like, "Oh, it's not about the chickpeas. It's about kind of putting a health halo around this food that doesn't need one, and like it's high protein. Why do we need protein in dessert?" But I just remembered your username, My Annoying Opinions, and I was like, this guy sounds interesting. Let's follow him. But I thought it was a very self-aware username for an internet forum.
It's a good way of disarming the first bit of criticism that comes your way, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, I know I'm annoying, so there's very little you can say to me.
Yeah, you're setting expectations and
and delivering, let's face it.
Yeah, there you go.
So you are publishing a cookbook in the hopefully near future ish?
Yeah, so this breaking news from the publisher, which is Rancho Gordo, the bean company who have a little boutique press on the side, is that it's going to be out anywhere between the end of the year and the start of next year. So I have to confess that, this book was supposed to be out quite some time ago, like as in more than 2 years ago. And the reason it's not out yet is mostly because I have managed to miss every single deadline that was ever presented to me. And they've been very understanding and tolerant of my inefficiencies, shall we say. And so I am loath to ever complain about when their priorities shift and, and they remember that bean selling is what they actually do. And the needs of my cookbook aren't always the top of the list.
In a kind of nutshell, could you describe what your cookbook is about?
Yeah, so I think the introductory materials that sort of make this case, trying not to sound very academic-y in the process, but I try to make this case for something that I call contemporary Indian cooking, which isn't really a very precise thing. It's not a particular genre of Indian food. It's more of a kind of, I would say, an attitude to Indian cooking. And I think it's one that a lot of Indian cooks, whether in the diaspora or in the home country, or rest of South Asia for that matter, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans, Pakistanis, Nepalese, people abroad and home, I think probably have the same kind of attitude as well, which is, if I back up a little bit, I think the primary ways in which Americans in particular understand Indian food is one or the other, right? So the classic lens is that of the North Indian restaurant, right? So what is Indian food will be, this litany of very well-known and well-loved dishes like butter chicken and saag paneer, mango lassis and naans and things which are also beloved back in India, right? So the North Indian restaurant menu is one sort of lens through which people say this is Indian food, right? And then in sort of reaction to that, mostly for good, a little bit now, I think sort of beginning to reach a kind of, the end of its line is sort of this, it's becoming commodified in its own way, is this notion of regional Indian cooking, right? Because in fact, in India, which region you're from, sort of determines everything about you, not just what you eat, your language, the flavor of, religion that you practice, and the kinds of clothes you wear, and so on and so forth, right? And so regional food, sort of bringing to attention sort of all the various other forms of Indian food, right? Whether it's Bengali or Marathi or Tamil or Malayali or what have you, right? Has been the major corrective, right? To sort of show people that in fact there's this, that the North Indian restaurant menu is just like a, not even the tip of the iceberg. It's sort of the tip of the iceberg, right? There's all this other stuff. And as I say, that's mostly been a really positive development, right? To the extent to which it's succeeded in the West. In India, of course, everybody just knows that, right? Because you might go out to eat North Indian food in a restaurant once a month. The rest of the time you're eating, food at home, which is very granular, very specific to your family's background and so on, right? So what I call contemporary Indian cooking is neither of those things. It's neither the restaurant model of cooking, nor is it some other kind of regional cooking. It's instead sort of the kind of cooking which, as I say, a lot of urban Indians in particular do, which is a sort of mixing and matching of different things, right? So at its most extreme end of that spectrum, you might say it's cooking with Indian ingredients, right? So almost all the cooking I do at home, Indian, I'd say 80% of the food I cook at home is Indian, right? But of that 80%, very little is traditional in the sense that you would understand it if you said that traditional Indian food was regional food of one kind or the other, right? So when I make spice blends for making a chicken curry, for example, I'll have things in there which, neither a Bengali traditional Bengali home cook would have, nor would a traditional Malayali home cook, right, have all those things, but I'd have a bit of things borrowed from here and there, all mixed together. But to me, it remains Indian cooking, not simply because it's Indian spices, but because the approach is an Indian one, right? That you may not be making. So let's take the example of chicken curry. The chicken curry chicken curry I make might not be recognizable to any person in any particular region as a particular regional chicken curry, but they will all immediately recognize it as an Indian chicken curry, right? Does that make sense? And so, this is not a kind of thing for which a particularly urgent case needs to be made. But it is a kind of Indian cooking that, as I say, a lot of Indians do, right? And I think oftentimes a very interesting kind of cooking, and it sort of gets left out of the usual model we have, which is either the North Indian restaurant model or the regional response to it. And I should say the cookbook also does have some recipes that are, more traditional than others, and then some that are absolutely not, right? Some that you might need to squint a little bit to sort of see the Indianness of them. So it's that spectrum, I would say, is what makes it contemporary Indian cooking, right? That it's all these things at once, all these things next to each other.
You sent over the intro material and really enjoyed it. I feel like I laughed at least 4 times in the first several paragraphs. So I really appreciate the tone that you take in that intro. But yeah, you kind of characterize your approach as like a hybrid approach, cross-pollination, and, implying that, your cooking practice is fluid, adaptable, malleable. And I was just wondering how that manifests in your recipes, like maybe an example or two.
Well, first of all, I should say that none of this is unique to me, right? I mean, so there's many Indians, South Asians in the diaspora and back home who cook this way, and nor is it something that's sort of generationally new. And I think, as you might remember from the introductory materials, that I gave the example of my mother, right? My mother's cooking, from the 1970s on. She's a rare Indian woman of her generation who didn't know how to cook until she got married, and so she sort of learned after she got married. And my father was in the Indian Air Force, and we were living, always a year and a half, 2 years in one place. And so my mother, as she was learning to cook, her cooking sort of, hybridized in all the regions that we were in based on what was available, who our neighbors were, right? And also reading women's magazines, which had often aspirational recipes for elite Indian women, Western recipes, and so on and so forth. And so her cooking sort of, comes from all these directions. So I'll give one example that's actually a autobiographical one. And it's actually, the recipe is actually in the book, right? So there's this dish my sister and I grew up eating, which was a special occasion dish my mother made that we called green masala fish, right? And because when you're young, you think that everything that your mother does is linked to your identity. So probably for some time, I thought it was a Bengali dish, right? And then at some point I realized, well, no other Bengalis seem to know this dish, right? And so then it sort of dawned on me, my mother said, oh, this is the Parsi dish, right? And then much later, when I became more aware of Parsi cuisine, I thought, oh, this looks and sounds like the Parsi patrani machi, right? Which is this dish made with fish, pomfret usually, coated with this mint and coriander paste and other things and coconut and so on, and then steamed in a banana leaf, right? My mother never steamed it in a banana leaf or anything else for that matter. But then some years ago, I discussed this recipe with the Parsi food writer Meher Mirza, who's based in Bombay and Mumbai, and Meher was a little bit shocked to hear that that I was describing this as a Parsi dish, and she took it to her mother, and they both decided, no, this is not a Parsi dish, right? So I then, for the first time ever, asked my mother, what was up with it, right? And she said, oh, I got this recipe in the early 70s from a Parsi Air Force friend of ours. And then we moved elsewhere and, banana leaves and things weren't available. I didn't have an oven, so I just started making it in the pan, right? And so then I said, oh, then at what point did you change the coconut to coconut milk? And she said, I never did. What are you talking about? And I said, I have a recipe that you sent me in the mail in the 90s that says coconut milk, right? And she said, it can't be. So I found the thing. It was, this tiny, this like fragile piece of paper, tattered, falling apart. And sure enough, it doesn't say coconut milk, right? But it says she had desiccated coconut in it, right? The Parsi original calls for fresh coconut, right? So she had, for whatever reason, maybe we were in a part of India at the time, when she was making it, that she didn't have fresh coconut available, and she just went with dried coconut and liked it and did it. And I at some point must have lost that direction and found coconut milk much easier to come by and just started using that instead, right? And so what you end up with is a dish that again has a kind of Parsi kernel to it, right? To a non-Parsi person might taste quite similar, but no Parsi person would sort of recognize it as that iconic traditional dish, both in some things that have to do with flavor, other things that have to do with texture and mode of preparation, and so on, right? That's one sort of extreme example.
So you're saying that contemporary Indian cooking is just the way people actually cook?
A lot of the time. A lot of people, I would say, when they cook, what they actually cook is traditional too, right? So I don't mean to make it out to seem like all of India is actually secretly cooking this way, right? Because I don't think that's true either. I just think it's an interesting form of Indian cooking, which deserves a little bit more attention. What's interesting is that it's getting that attention now in sort of the high-end restaurant world, where, both in the UK and in the US, and also to some degree in India as well, you do have these restaurants, that get tagged with this term that I completely despise, progressive Indian food, right? As though this is some sort of, it has this kind of like moralistic sort of feel to it, right? To call it progressive. But that's always done in a particular kind of restaurant idiom, right? Kind of sort of, that other hated term, elevated.
Oh, I hate
right?
elevated.
And so on, right? And so this is like a very down-homey version of what Indian cooking of various kinds might look like if you're not extremely preoccupied with would my grandmother or her grandmother have made it this way, right? Or more accurately, the angry person on the internet with their grandmother or their grandmother's grandmother have made it that way.
So Rombauer Vineyards is sponsoring today's episode, and honestly, I've been wanting to talk about them because they just released a fresh vintage of their Sauvignon Blanc, and it's quickly become my go-to white wine as we head into the warmer months. It's refreshing and vibrant, exactly what you want when the sun is out. I've been having it with asparagus with orange and hazelnuts, and I mean, it just works perfectly.
And okay, if you're planning on firing up the grill soon, let me tell you about their Zinfandels. They just released their 2023 vintage, and it's bold, juicy, and has real depth. The kind of wine that just belongs with good food and good company. Something like grilled marinated octopus with shaved fennel and white bean salad comes to mind, but it's so versatile.
Head to rombauer.com/joy and use code JOYPOD. That's JOYPOD, all caps, for 15% off. That's ROMBAUER.com/joy and use code JOYPOD at checkout.
Must be 21 to enjoy.
You brought up your mother's written recipes that she's sent you over the years. And I remember you mentioned in the intro, like a lot of those were written in a very simplified form because she wanted them to be at your skill level when you had just moved to the States.
Right.
And I was just, kind of curious. You kind of talk about like how that was a really good idea. She was correct in like what she was expecting you to be capable of. And I was just kind of wondering if you made any kind of allowances like that in the contemporary Indian cooking for your readership.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a way in which recipes as written down things are sort of, antithetical to how I feel about cooking, and particularly about home cooking, which I think is where food culture truly lives, is in home kitchens and not in restaurant kitchens. And in the US and the UK in particular, I think that understanding is kind of flipped, where restaurants are seen as sort of the, as the place where food is understood and advanced and so on. And home cooks are being taught to make things the way that restaurants do and so on. Joy is a wonderful, sort of antidote to that kind of thing. But, in the cookbook, I say at one point in the introductory materials that, it feels like an admission, but I don't really mean it as an admission, which is that I rarely cook these things the same way twice, right? What a good recipe always is a kind of, it's an introduction to a genre, right? That here's a thing which, if you use some of these ingredients and do these kinds of things to it, the outcome is going to be somewhat like this, and the outcome will almost always be good, right? Now, does it make a huge amount of difference whether you use 2 teaspoons of cumin seeds and 1 of coriander seed in the masala as opposed to 2 of coriander seed and 1 of cumin seed? Maybe, right? But neither is wrong, right? You'll just end up with, slightly different versions of the same thing. And so I think my mother's sort of, initial recipes to me, which were based entirely on like, what can this idiot do, right? On his own in a country where almost nothing will be available to him, right? Again, both of which were, as you say, accurate. But what it allowed me to sort of become was a cook, because I had these sort of like bare bones recipes and these directions that were very, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and, look for this. They weren't devoid of direction, but the directions were more like, cook till you see the oil begin to separate and the smell becomes like this and things of that nature. And so that allowed me to not only sort of be loose in my cooking, but also to feel a kind of ownership of the cooking, right? Because even as I became a pretty good cook, my food was, for certain dishes, was very similar to my mother's, but not identical. And I knew it arrived when certain dishes, when she and my father would visit us in the US, there are certain dishes she would make, but certain other dishes she'd tell me, why don't you make that?
I love that distinction about recipes that don't need to be followed absolutely to the letter, because I think that's how people learn to become cooks and become independent and not need to be told everything. But there's also this tension that I feel like we're always experiencing when we're developing recipes. Like, we want to give people the information they need to make a thing that tastes great, but not make them feel like they can't deviate at all. So like, yeah, I don't know. That's not really a question. It's just a kind of a discussion.
Yeah, and certainly, like, this discussions happened on Twitter in the past, right? Where I think some people, well, upset is too strong a word, but some people disagreed quite strongly with me on the notion of whether a novice cook or a beginning cook is likely to be better off with more direction or less. And my sense always is less, because that's how I learned how to cook. But I take the point that there are people who perhaps have so little faith in their abilities that they want everything to be codified down to the last gram, and so on. I tend to think that makes people more tense, right?
I agree.
When the thing is presented as more of a precise formula, then you begin to worry too much about the whole thing. Begins to feel like an ordeal, right? That you can't cook until you have every single ingredient, laid out in front of you, and so on, and then, oh shit, a little bit more fell in than I need of this, right? Whereas, if you've seen my Instagram videos, I'm constantly just pouring stuff in with jars.
Trusting your gut is really helpful when you're cooking sometimes too. And
yeah,
I know my husband is a recipe follower, as is our producer, who was like pointing at himself during that conversation. And sometimes I just want to like look at him and be like, you've got this. You know what tastes good. Like, just trust yourself.
Yeah, you've
But
got wings. Just fly.
I know, but it's really hard. It's really hard when you don't have that confidence, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy both types. Sometimes I really need to just relegate myself to the role of recipe following robot, and then other times I'm feeling like spreading my wings more. I think that a lot of people kind of vacillate between those two, or maybe I'm just projecting.
Right. And I guess the twist to that, right, also is I have to admit that the times that I'm more apt to follow a recipe are when I'm making something from a different culture for the first time. By which I mean, I don't necessarily mean non-Indian. It could be like a Malayali dish or a Sindhi dish that I've never cooked before and perhaps I've never eaten before, right? So I won't know exactly what it's supposed to taste like until I follow it closely and so on, right? So I think maybe when you're cooking within your own tradition, however you construe that, you feel maybe a little more freedom, right? But with the first couple of times you make something new, you do want to sort of play by the rules. But then I think it's important once you get comfortable to sort of let them go, right? No, don't keep looking at the cookbook constantly, or don't take it very seriously, right?
I kind of had this was years ago, I heard an interview with, I'm blanking on his name now. Oh my gosh. Indian cookbook author. He passed away. Raghavan Iyer.
Oh, yeah. Raghavan Iyer, right. He was from Minnesota.
Yeah. He was lovely, and he gave this great interview on The Splendid Table. This was probably like 2011 or something. It was a long time ago. But he was talking about the different ways that spices are treated in Indian cooking and how, there are all these different applications or different ways to apply them. So like you might have, everyone knows about the tarka where you're not simmering, but you're like blooming the spices in oil or the whole spices. But then there's, you might add ground spices that aren't toasted, or you might toast and then grind the spices, or there's all these different ways of incorporating spices that give you different effects in the recipe. And I feel like that was a dot I hadn't connected up until that point. I think I was under the misapprehension that I needed to be toasting and grinding my curry powders every time, and like I had this kind of stilted view of it. But he kind of opened my perception to like what all the different possibilities were. So that was really cool. And yeah, I think you pick up things like that when you follow a recipe and you don't deviate too much. You're like, oh, that's interesting that it's done this way. I wonder what that does, and then maybe you can take that skill and apply it to other recipes as well.
Right.
In your intro that you sent over, you also talk a bit about grinding spices from scratch every single time, and how there are certain assumptions made. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, it's the great romance of Indian food, particularly in the genre of Indian cookbooks in the West, right? And I think it sort of came from a particular time in the 70s and 80s where writers like Madhur Jaffrey were first opening up sort of the greater possibilities of what Indian food was to American audiences. And so there was this, or British audiences for that matter. And so there was this kind of need to insist on this kind of artisanal kind of rigor, right? That there's no such thing as curry, there's no such thing as curry powder, that all spices are ground fresh, and so on and so forth. And there's probably only really two kinds of households where that's true. One is extremely wealthy, feudalistic, homes where a lot of cheap or free labor is available, usually from women, to do that kind of work. Or it's the home, and this is where the American foodie comes in, right? It's the home and kitchen of the hobbyist cook, for whom everything is a kind of project. That when you make tandoori chicken, you're making the best tandoori chicken, or something along those lines. And so every single ingredient has to be sourced in a particular way and massaged just right? Otherwise, you're going to not have the best tandoori chicken or whatever, right? But when you take it away from sort of either the elite, very elite, super elite sort of class world, or you take it out of the kitchen of the hobbyist, right? That vast space is where most normal people actually cook. And particularly for middle class and lower middle class people, who has the time, right? I mean, I am probably more on the hobbyist end of the spectrum than your average housewife in India, and even I don't have the time to be constantly toasting and grinding spices and so on, right? And all you need to do is go into any Indian grocery store, whether it's in India or abroad, and just see the row after row of, commercial spices, right? The spice mixes, including curry powder, right? The thing that people keep telling us doesn't exist on the shelves, right? Or Amazon India, which sells only to people in India, has n number of curry powders for sale, right? Including in 500-gram sizes, right? You can buy a pound of curry powder at a time.
Could you elaborate? I'm sorry, I'm going to distract you for a second, but could you elaborate a little on that? Because I think a lot of our listeners probably don't know about the curry powder discourse online. It feels like a very online thing. Does that seem online to you?
Yeah, so the whole curry powder doesn't exist thing and Indians don't eat curry thing, it's this, I think it's sort of this comes from a well-meaning place, a kind of big P political desire to sort of not have Indian food identified with a particular set of terms, a particular set of ingredients, because those things sound lazy, right? Curry powder, or this thing that the British invented, and so on, right? And curry powder probably was invented by the British, but in the couple of hundred years since that invention, Indians have basically indigenized it, taken it over, just as they have many other things that the British brought to India, right? Including chilies, for example. Well, the British didn't bring chilies, the Dutch or Portuguese did. But you know what I mean. All the stuff that came with the Columbian Exchange through various colonial vectors, indigenized in turn. And so this idea that every single dish has its own specific blend of spices that has to be purpose ground and purpose toasted, for that purpose, is not really true, right? I mean, there are all kinds of Indian communities that have master spice blends, so Malwani masala in the Southwest, right? Malwani masala, which is used in seafood dishes and fish curries, used in vegetable curries, and so on and so forth. There's chettinad masala, various. I could go on and on. There's endless list of these kinds of things, right? So there is this much more heterogeneous, much more diverse, practice of ingredients in Indian cooking in India and in the West and online and in the foodie world, that sort of gets turned into this particular discourse of trying to take the definition of Indian food away from the hands and pens and typewriters and keyboards of people not of Indian origin, and one way to do that is to insist that these things that you think you've taken for always known are actually all completely wrong, right? And there's a way in which that is true to some extent. Americans, for example, talk about curry as though it's a flavor, right? Including in 3 Michelin star restaurants will sometimes say fish with curry, right? And what the hell is that, right? I mean, is that turmeric? Is that what is it that you mean by curry, right? So that kind of thing is certainly wrong, right? Also thinking of all Indian food as curry is certainly wrong, but there's a very long distance from that to curry powder doesn't exist and all spices are ground fresh and Indians don't eat curry, right? Whereas, I was just in Bombay for 5 weeks in April and early May, and there are Maharashtrian restaurants where the menu is not even in English, right? Where a whole page of the menu will just be curry, right? In Devanagari script, right? And most Indian chefs, if you watch them on Instagram videos and so on, feel no anxiety about using the word curry, right? Which really seems to be an Indian American food writer preoccupation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a reaction to seeing Indian cuisine flattened, but maybe just an slight overreaction in that direction.
More than slight, I would say, and I think doesn't end up in a good place, because it sort of ends up ironically in a kind of fundamentalist version of Indian food, which is that Indian food is these particular pure practices, or that Indian food somehow must be cleansed of all colonial sort of vestiges, right? Except if you stop and think about who else in India is actually making these kinds of claims, it's not people you would want to be on the same side of the fence as, right? The nativists. Whereas in fact, culture is always mixed, is always, hybrid, is always bastardized, right? That's how culture spreads. That's how it stays alive.
You said in the introduction to your cookbook, tradition is always on the move. The worst thing we can do to tradition is to cede it to the traditionalists. And I feel like I highlighted that because I've been thinking a lot about how codifying foods and recipes and cuisines seems to be a very modern exercise. I don't necessarily think a lot of people were thinking about it like having a national cuisine, like Italian cuisine. I don't think people were thinking about that, 200 years ago, probably largely because the people doing the cooking were women and nobody cared what they were doing, and women weren't writing things down because they couldn't write, because they couldn't be educated. But like, there seems to be this modern project of codifying cuisines and kind of putting them up on a pedestal. And then to me, it feels like a form of gatekeeping, or it can also like feel like very nationalistic. Like, this is our cuisine and you can't deviate from this bolognese recipe or you're disowned or whatever. There's something very stilted about it that doesn't feel authentic to the way people actually cook and eat.
Right. And it's also often comes from a very limited exposure to the thing that you are so exercised about, right? So I think we had a brief online discussion of this recently, right? The whole Bolognese thing. I remember this kerfuffle online a few weeks or months ago of somebody who took a very hard line against the use of milk in ragu Bolognese on all the predictable lines, right? My Bolognese husband, and and so on and so forth. And then it turned out, as they learned for the first time, that in the city of Bologna's codified recipe has milk in it, right? And this was something that they discovered for the first time, right? So oftentimes the people doing the gatekeeping, have only seen one particular gate, right? All the different ways into that garden that there might be. But then you do also sometimes feel a little bit of sympathy for that position, right? And I do have to say, as much as I have annoyed and antagonized various Indian American food writers over the years, I do get where some of this is coming from, right? A lot of this is coming from, which is this kind of like, once something becomes big, who gets to own it, right? Mm-hmm. And when some aspect, especially if you've lived abroad and your culture has been denigrated when you were growing up to whatever degree, and then now suddenly some aspect of it is becoming popular, who gets to be the expert on it, right? Mm-hmm. Though I would say, and perhaps this is the academic in me coming out, is it's great, especially for things to do with culture, if somebody who has an intimate exposure to that culture is the one who's doing most of the talking about it. But that person should also know what they're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. Mere identity is not enough. You don't want to take the specter of the bad white American food writer talking about Indian food and replace it with only a slightly more knowledgeable person who just happens to be of Indian origin.
Oh, hello. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you about an easy way to enhance your meals. Whether they are a healthy vegan grain bowl or that late night snack we'll pretend didn't happen the next day, and that easy way is Marshall's Hot Sauce. For 15 years, chef and cookbook author Sarah Marshall has been hand-making and bottling these delicious sauces. She works directly with local farmers and highlights the lovely flavors of fresh seasonal produce. They're gluten-free, there are no additives, dyes, waxes, or binders, and they have mouth-watering combinations like serrano ginger lemongrass, or habanero carrot curry, or even whiskey smoked ghost, which was featured on Hot Ones. So head on over to marshallshotsauce.com, that's Marshall's, HAUTESAUCE.com, and see all the available sauces and spice blends. Oh, that's right. Sarah's created spice packets by dehydrating and freeze-drying actual produce, so you can impart flavor to your food with more vegetables. But that's a story for another day. Find all of these delicious creations at marshallshotsauce.com and enter HOTJOY, that's one word, capital H, AUTE, capital JOY, one word, at checkout for 20% off. That's HOTJOY at checkout for 20% off. And now, back to the show.
So each week we answer a caller question, and this week we are talking about must-bring spices for camping. Dirk, can you read the question?
What spices are non-negotiable when camping?
Spices.
Yeah, spices.
First of all, I'll admit that the last time I went camping was in 2005. So I'm not a huge camper, but my very strong belief is that if you go camping, you should not be cooking. You should be reheating things out of cans, right? The campfire is not the place to be toasting and grinding spices.
Certainly not. What about you, Shannon?
I don't know about your camping trips, but
we always bring our spice grinder.
We do a lot of camping, and one thing that I did note is there have been times that I've just been on that get everything in the car, let's go, we've got to hit the road, that I forget simple things like salt and pepper because they're in the
that's the
kitchen and I just
worst.
always cook with them and they're always readily available. It happened a couple of times when like we really started camping a lot more often. And so now one thing I just wanted to mention is always have like a salt and pepper container near all of your camping supplies. Like, it will save you so much.
That is the saddest.
It
I
was
think
awful.
I've forgotten salt once, and it's very
It's the
sad
worst.
to not have that.
So just have a separate salt and pepper for camping, especially if you camp a lot. What, John?
It's just hilarious that you're talking about it this way because I was having trouble coming up with like a list of essential spices until I thought about, well, what would I get really, really pissed at myself for forgetting?
Salt and pepper.
Yeah, salt and pepper. Probably, if I forgot pepper flake, I need chili flakes or
Yeah.
just something spicy because even if you're cooking out of a can or cooking things that are out of a can, just
when I said cooking, I meant reheating.
oh, it's cooking. Come on, you're applying heat. It's,
Dried fresh herbs like rosemary, thyme, oregano, that has helped me in the past just kind of make things feel a little fresher. Like even a can of beans that you're reheating, you add some oregano in there and some chili flakes. It's going to be a little bit more interesting. And then we always have like a packet of the Trader Joe's taco seasoning just in the basket because even if like I'm making scrambled eggs in the morning and like the third day and I just want something a little bit different, it's easy, it's light. You're not having to do anything. You just add that in there and it adds a little bit more flavor. We keep it really simple unless we're going like with you guys and then we just kind of do gourmet cooking. It feels
Wow.
like
So
sometimes.
you change it up when you're going with us?
When it's like glamping.
Okay. Yeah.
When you have
I
the
was like, don't do something different on our account.
No, I'm like just thinking like bare minimum camping. Just make sure you have your salt and pepper. Learn from my mistakes.
Again, if you just open a can, you don't need to worry about
Don't have to worry about it.
Just dump the can into the
Or take
into
that
the pan.
advice.
Plenty of salt in
Well,
there.
I'm disappointed in Megan and John. I would imagine that you don't take any.
Oh, I'm not
any herbs
done.
or spices, but you forage in the forest next to the
oh
can
yeah,
for,
no, we
for the
consult
wild
our
garlic.
we consult our field guides and harvest the wild garlic and no.
I was going to say chicken bouillon powder. Not a spice, but also makes everything taste richer and more craveable and just gives it that sort of umami-ness that you can miss sometimes when you're cooking really simple stuff.
Especially like backpacking.
Yeah,
type
it's
stuff.
really good for backpacking. Although I feel like most backpacking food has so much salt in it that you don't really need chicken bouillon powder. But
But yeah, also, if you're not able to pack citrus, like having some of that dehydrated lime or lemon powder around is kind of nice, or some sumac, which brings me, actually, I got in touch with Kelly Kate Warren, former guest and friend of the pod, just to get her take on things, AKA the backcountry cook, in case our listeners have not had the chance to go through that episode. But yeah, she kind of came up with some similar spices, but garlic and onion, I'm assuming powders.
Yeah.
Smoked paprika for smoky campfire vibes, and she brings a pepper grinder. So yeah, I guess
Brings the pepper grinder.
the whole grinder and flake salt. She's like insisted on flake salt. Elevates. I'm sorry to use that word. But elevates every dish. S'mores, flake salt. Grilled veggies, a breakfast sandwich, flake salt. Makes everything better. And
S'mores with flake salt. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
and also shichimi togarashi. She is a big fan of taking that on trips.
This is the person who goes camping.
yes.
She runs pack mule trips in the High Sierra. So yeah, we had her on.
She's a cook for this kind of expedition. So yeah, she had some really fun ideas.
But yeah, 2 pack mules for her setup. So, it's certainly like a step beyond opening some cans for sure.
Yeah, well, I would love to go on that and have her cook for me. But the smoky campfire vibes, isn't that what the campfire is for?
Right.
Yeah, you just grind up a little of that smoldering wood and the seasoning's right there, guys.
Yeah, I feel like you're going to get the most bang for your buck with like seasoning blends or like an all-purpose seasoning like Larise.
Like a curry powder, maybe?
Like curry powder that exists. Slap Ya Mama.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that. You need something with just like, it's got the garlic, it's got the spice. And then this is not like a spice and it's not even dry, but I think chili crisp, like a little thing of chili crisp is very nice to have when you're camping if you don't mind.
But your pack weight's going to go way up.
I'm not really backpacking. I don't know. We're not talking about backpacking. This is camping.
Fine.
And kind of in the spirit of camping food, this week's Joy Scouts recipe is the Kimchi Mac on page 296. We made this, it's been a few years, but we've made this camping a couple times, and it's perfect because most of the ingredients can withstand suboptimal refrigeration. So you've got your kimchi, cheese, eggs, and butter. And then the Joy of Cooking's version of this recipe calls for the mac and cheese recipe calls for evaporated milk instead of regular milk. So that's a can, which is very convenient for camping. And then you've got your dry pasta. So it's really a friendly meal to make when you're camping. And it's delicious. It's so good. It's got that like cozy stick to your ribs quality, but the kimchi like brightens it and adds all this acidity and like complex flavor. Yeah, it's great. Highly recommend. So if you make that, please tag us on Instagram at The Joy of Cooking. And if you have a cooking question or joy story to share, call our hotline at 503-395-8858. Leave us a message or send us a text. We'd love to hear from you. And we're going on a little bit of a summer break, so we don't have a question picked out for the next episode. So it's going to be a surprise. Surprise.
Fun. I'm excited.
Surprise question.
We'll be back in September, though,
Yeah,
right?
we'll be back. I don't think we're going to be missing any weeks posting episodes. I think we're just taking a break.
Perfect.
Yeah. All right. What's everybody cooking this week? What are you excited about?
We're on summer break, so I'm going to lean into summer vibes. We're into popsicles. We have so many kinds of popsicles right now, and I'm
Are
loving
you
it.
making them or are you buying them?
We're just buying them.
Nice.
And I've seen this thing online that I want to try actually when we go camping, which is like savory s'mores,
What?
where it's like Ritz crackers and cheese
Okay.
and that kind of thing over the fire. So I want to try that this year. I've always, because I'm not,
You're not a
over your
sweets
years,
person.
producer, I'm not a huge marshmallow fan, and John. You love marshmallows,
Yeah,
right?
John is crazy about money. No, I'm kidding. Not really.
I think-
everyone knows. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's the last sort of index. Despite the fact that I'm now a citizen and have been for 7 years or so, I don't think I'll ever be truly American because I don't really understand marshmallows. I don't understand what they are, what their appeal is, why adults still eat them.
what about when they're torched? Does that change your opinion at all? Or
Well, that's a camping thing, right? So
right.
I think we've established that my
Since
camping knowledge
2005.
is minimal. But yeah, I mean, as something you're burning when you're camping, sure.
Yeah, especially if it's like savory Ritz crackers and cheese and like delicious stuff
Yeah.
like that. So I'm going to try that.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
What about you, John? What are you thinking about making this week for me?
there's another hot dog confrontation that has to happen. But aside from that, just planning on more grilling, and eventually the freaking tomatoes are going to show up. And so tomato salads, maybe a Hetty McKinnon dumpling tomato salad.
That's such a
maybe.
good recipe. I love that.
Yeah.
What about you, Arnab?
Coincidentally, I'm actually going to be making that green masala fish I talked about earlier in the show. I have two massive, I never know how to pronounce the name of this fish. Pompano? Is that how you say it?
Yeah,
Pompano?
pompano. I think. Yeah.
Pompano? You know, I stopped buying frozen Indian fish a while ago out of concerns about environmental damage and so on, and instead I buy frozen Chinese fish, which I'm sure is not grown and harvested in any better circumstances, but it's the closest analog I can find in the U.S. to my beloved pomfret, which is quite endangered now in India as well. And I just picked some really lovely cilantro from our CSA Open Hands just outside our town. Yeah, so I'm going to be blending that up with some mint and making that tomorrow for lunch.
Is that recipe in your cookbook? Did you already say this?
Oh, it is, yes.
Cool. That sounds so good.
I'll send it to you guys if you want.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Would
we
love that.
It might actually be on my blog as well.
Oh, cool. And we'll link to your website. And if you want us to link to your social media, we will link to it in our show notes.
I'm now an Instagram celebrity. I have, by which I mean only that for no reason that I can fathom, a random pasta reel that I put up got 100,000 views, which for a lot of people would be like nothing at all. But usually, like, I'm excited if I get 2,000 views. So I have no idea why this happened, but it did. So
I feel like that's objectively exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Seems
that's
seems,
a lot of
seems like a lot.
views.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, and I'll get a lot of flack for saying this probably, but there's two classes of food people online who are likely to be insufferable when it comes to conversation about their food. One is Indians and the other is Italians, right? And Italians possibly a little bit more than Indians even. And I did get some angry Italian feedback on this recipe, but I did look today, this evening, for the first time. Instagram gives you like your numbers. You can look at the country from which things, and the largest percentage of viewers are from Italy. So given that, the fact that so few of them are shouting at me makes me feel like, okay, not that I'm calling it an Italian recipe, but...
Well, congratulations. I was thinking your post was doing well because you made Italians mad, because the algorithm loves rage.
Right. I mean, who knows? I think the reason it might be doing well is because it opens with a bunch of small octopi being dumped into a pan. So it's got like maybe a visual hook to it. Most of my recipes begin with, spices being dropped in oil or onions or something, which aren't very exciting. So maybe that's the secret. I would worry about it if I had any ambitions to do it again, but I mostly just want to cook things the way I want to cook and not the way the algorithm wants me to cook.
Thanks for listening to the Joy of Cooking podcast. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by subscribing to the show and leaving us a review. Follow us at joyofcooking.substack.com and on Instagram at The Joy of Cooking. Stay tuned for next week, where we'll talk about something. I don't know what our topic's going to be, so send us questions. And don't forget to make this week's recipe, Kimchi Mac, on page 296. Call in with questions, hopes, history, or where you find joy in the kitchen. Our number is 503-395-8858. That's 503-395-8858.
And we couldn't do this without our fantastic team at the Joy of Creation production house. Thank you to Haley Bowers, our audio engineer, and Dirk Marshall, our producer.
If you love the stories we bring you each week, please consider supporting us on Patreon. As an independent media company, your support is absolutely essential. It allows us to continue creating high-quality professional episodes that amplify the voices of women, small business owners, writers, artists, and creatives, and keep their stories free from commercial pressure. By becoming a Patreon member, you're not just supporting us, you're investing in the future of independent media. Please visit patreon.com/The Joy of Creation Production House to join our community today. Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast dreams.